Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the American history teacher, the gold standard of economics, Professor G here, with Unit 1, Lesson number 2. Today we are going to talk about capitalism, the fundamentals of capitalism, and our first graph of the course, which is the circular flow model, the graph of capitalism. And we're going to talk about how capitalism, the economic system, answers those three fundamental questions of what to produce, how to produce, and who should receive the goods and services produced. And capitalism is based on these 7 pillars. Some people have 5 pillars, 4 pillars, 6 pillars, 8 pillars, but ultimately I like to think of these as the 7 pillars of capitalism. And this is what makes capitalism, what makes it work as an economic system, which without these, it will not work. But with all of these, what you have is the evolution of free and prosperous societies. First is, like I just said, freedom, that everything flows from freedom. 2, private property. And this includes private property and private enterprise, meaning both that it's the consumer, it is the worker, it is the business. That the fruits of your labor are yours. You are working for yourself. It is the motivation that makes everything work. Number 4, profit motive. Like I said in episode 1, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies. Greed cuts through and captures the evolutionary spirit of mankind. And we think about, starting with the commercial revolution, with the introduction of capitalism, how human society has advanced throughout the centuries because of that profit motive. Number 5, freedom of contract, that either as a worker or a business, that you get to enter into whoever you wish to with a contract. And that contract is enforceable by law. 6, competition, that businesses compete with each other for the best workers, for the consumers, so here we have consumers have increased quality, increased quantity at a better price. And the same thing for workers. Businesses have to compete with each other to get the best workers. And number 7, consumer sovereignty, going hand in hand with competition. We as consumers get to choose which businesses we want to go to. And really 2 through 7 all stem from this overarching theme of freedom. The freer the interaction between households, which as people are both the consumer and the worker, and the business, that interaction between households and businesses, the freer the interaction, the better the system of capitalism works. Now we're going to take a look at how does capitalism incorporate its 7 pillars to answer the 3 fundamental economic questions that all societies must answer due to the issue of scarcity. Remember, unlimited wants versus limited resources. So as we go through these 3 fundamental questions and capitalism's answers to it, think about how you see those 7 pillars of capitalism. First, what to produce. Capitalism, the economic system of capitalism, answers this with profit. What to produce, what will make a profit. And what will make a profit? Consumer sovereignty. Meaning the consumer's needs and wants. And then businesses will compete with each other to increase their market share of the most consumers possible. 2, how to produce. This is a trickier question, and the answer is the most efficient way possible. And because business is focused on, and capitalism is focused on private ownership, it is based that individual businesses get to decide, well, what is the most efficient way possible? And in our course, we're going to actually take a look at how to calculate efficiency with a concept called opportunity cost. So a very important concept. It's actually our next lesson, and the concept of opportunity cost is going to be the scientific and mathematical way to actually calculate efficiency. And question number 3, who receives the goods and services produced. This is based on the free interaction between consumers and businesses. And that free interaction takes place in the free market with supply and demand. We're going to talk about everything about supply and demand a little later on in this course. And that free interaction, the demand of the consumer, the ability and willingness of the consumers to buy a product, demand, versus the ability and willingness of businesses to supply that product, law of supply, the interaction between the two will create a price system which will determine who receives those goods and services in the free market. And now we're going to take a look at the graph, the first graph of the course, the circular flow model, which illustrates that interaction. So now here we have our first diagram of AP Economics, the circular flow model, which shows the free interaction between consumers and businesses, and really households and businesses. Because a household, the interesting thing about households is that we're up to two natures. We are both the consumer and we are the owners of the resource. It could be the labor, it could be the landowner, and interestingly, those two tend to be at odds with each other, even though we are one and the same. But let's take a look. So, and also we have here in the purest form, it is just between the households and the businesses. But of course, as we've seen throughout history as well, government is important, minimally as a referee between households and businesses. And for an American history, we really start to see this with Theodore Roosevelt and the Square Deal, the need for a government as referee. And even in the pillars of capitalism, things like freedom of contract, those are upheld by a government court system. So you do need the government in the free market. And we see in different societies to what extent that government is a heavier or lesser part of it. But we are all going to include the government in the circular flow model as well, because the government does take taxes from both households and businesses. The green column and green arrows are the taxes, and in return it gives households and businesses goods and services. And also, very importantly, part of those goods and services is, especially services, is the infrastructure in which to conduct business. So let's take a look at the circular flow model. The circular flow model is divided into two parts. Part one is the product market. Here is where households and businesses exchange with each other, households interact with each other, where households give businesses payments in exchange for goods and services. So this is where we as households go into a store, give a business money in exchange for Coca-Cola or something like that. So this is where we act as, we are the consumer in the product market. This is very simply just going to the fancy name for going to the store, and we give businesses money, payments, in exchange for goods and services. Those payments, businesses can then use in the factor market. And in the factor market, this is where we, once again, interact with businesses freely, but this time we're not interacting with businesses as consumers. That's the product market. In the factor market, we are interacting with businesses as the factors of production. Now, it could be as the labor, it could be as the person that owns the land, it could even be as the entrepreneur who brings all of these factors together. And in the factor market, named after also called the input market, also have to add the product market, could also be seen on the AP test as the output market. But in the factor market, households act as factors of production, so we sell ourselves as resources. Why do we work? For businesses, acting as a factor of production in exchange for wages, could be interest, could be rent, or even as the entrepreneur, could be profit, and we receive that as the resource owner. So we see the payments go around clockwise through the circular flow model. And politically, this is where you have the most political and policy difference. Because if the government is collecting from households and it's collecting from businesses, and then the government, through its fiscal powers of taxing and spending, can put money into the circular flow model, the question is the very chicken or egg question. The question is, where does the flow of money start? And here is where Republicans and Democrats, fiscal liberals and fiscal conservatives have the biggest difference. Does the flow of the dollar start in the factor market? Does the flow of the dollar start with businesses employing households, giving those households money to then spend in the product market, whereby then businesses have more money and they can hire more people, and that goes around and around. If you tend to believe that line of thought, you are more fiscally conservative. However, if you believe that the flow of the dollar starts in the product market, that means that the flow of the dollar starts with households going to businesses, giving the businesses money in exchange for goods and services. Then those businesses have money to then employ more households as resources. Then those households now have more money to go back into the product market. If you believe that line of thought, you tend to be more fiscally liberal. Very chicken or egg, because ultimately that dollar keeps flowing around and around the circular flow model. But the big government difference, the big government controversy is, well, where, if you're creating government policy, if you're creating fiscal policy, which means Congress's ability to tax and spend, the big question is, how are you going to use that policy? Where are you going to inject that money? Are you going to inject that money into the product market, into consumers' pockets, or are you going to inject that money into the factor market, giving businesses the ability to hire more households? Whichever you choose tends to be where you lie more fiscally, politically. And this is lesson number 2, Fundamentals of Capitalism, the circular flow model. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on our next lesson. Remember, money never sleeps.